You know, it's really tough trying to follow exactly what's happening in Gaza right now.
Oh, definitely.
There's just so many different stories, different angles flying around, and if you're just trying to, like, get a basic grasp without getting totally overwhelmed, it can feel, well, pretty challenging.
It absolutely can. The whole situation is incredibly complex, and yeah, the sheer number of viewpoints makes it hard to sift through and figure out what really matters.
Exactly, and that's pretty much what we're aiming to tackle in this deep dive. We've gone through a whole stack of sources, news reports, official statements from the parties involved, analysis from international groups, legal perspectives.
And even those really powerful personal accounts from people actually living through it in Gaza.
Right. So our mission here is to kind of cut through that noise for you, pull out the key insights, the really important bits of information, and hopefully help make sense of the different ways this latest escalation is being viewed.
Yeah, by looking at it from these different angles, we can hopefully build a clearer picture, not just of the events, but, what might be driving them and how different people are reading the situation.
Okay, so let's dive right in then. One of the first things that just leaps out is how differently this recent escalation is being described. It really depends on who you ask. Let's start with Hamas. Their view, based on our sources, is that Israel actually broke the ceasefire.
That's their line, yes. They see Israel's renewed attacks as a deliberate choice to ditch the pause that was agreed upon.
Right.
They said pretty directly that Netanyahu's government is, and I'm sort of paraphrasing here, overturning the ceasefire agreement, and that this puts the prisoners in Gaza in an unknown fate.
It's interesting how they frame that, linking the ceasefire to the fate of the prisoners. And they're very critical of Netanyahu personally, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. They've used strong language saying he's willing to, quote, sacrifice the occupation's prisoners and impose a death sentence on them. It's a very stark accusation.
Suggesting he doesn't care about life on either side, really.
Exactly. Their narrative paints him as someone putting his own political survival first, prolonging the war despite repeated calls from within Israeli society to halt the conflict.
So they're basically saying his own legal troubles are driving this.
That's the implication, yes. They suggest he's trying to escape prosecution.
And they seem to offer a way out, saying the release of captives in exchange for a cessation of the war. The world accepts it, but Netanyahu rejects it.
Right, positioning themselves as reasonable while painting Israel's leader as the obstacle.
And they wrap it up with that really pointed line about the blood of Gaza's children and the occupation's prisoners being victims of his ambitions.
It really hammers home their argument that this escalation is all down to Netanyahu wanting to stay in power.
Okay, now let's flip that. How is Israel framing it? Specifically, statements coming out of the Prime Minister's office. It's, unsurprisingly, a very different story.
Completely different. They describe their operation as open-ended and expected to expand.
Open-ended, so no clear end date.
No. And they justify it as a necessary response because, they say, Hamas keeps holding on to the hostages. The official line is that Israel will act against Hamas with increasing military force directly because of Hamas's repeated refusal to release our hostages and rejecting all the proposals they've received.
So they're directly countering that Hamas narrative about Israel breaking the truce.
Precisely. And you hear that echoed by Defense Minister Katz, too. He said something like, we will not stop fighting until the hostages are back and their war aims are met.
So for Israel, it's all tied directly to getting their people back and achieving their wider goals in this conflict.
Yes, and Katz mentioned some specific places, too, didn't he? The Marag and Netzarim corridors. He talked about turning Rafah into an Israeli security zone and expanding Netzarim. That hints at maybe longer-term strategic thinking beyond just the immediate fighting.
Right, suggesting a potential shift in control over parts of Gaza. And he also gave that ultimatum, didn't he? The last chance for people in Gaza.
Yeah, basically telling them to banish Hamas and release the hostages to stop the war, or else the operations would spread across most of Gaza. It's an incredibly stark choice for civilians already in a desperate situation.
And Netanyahu's office specifically mentioned that this started after Hamas rejected ceasefire proposals mediated by the U.S.
That's a key detail for them, yeah. It directly pushes back on the Hamas claim that Israel just unilaterally ended things. Shows how contested the lead-up was.
Absolutely. And then caught right in the crossfire of these competing narratives, you have the families of the Israeli hostages. Their perspective is just agonizing.
It really is. They've talked about being shocked, angry, and terrified by what they see as the deliberate dismantling of the process to get their loved ones back. You can only imagine their distress.
It sounds like betrayal, almost. They're quoted accusing the government of choosing to give up on the hostages by starting these new attacks.
Yeah, and asking why the government backed out of the ceasefire when that seemed like the best hope. For them, it's simple: get their families back safely. And they see this escalation as undermining that.
Just heartbreaking. Okay, let's broaden the view now. How are the neighboring countries reacting? We're seeing quite a bit of condemnation from across the Middle East, right?
We are, yes. Yemen's Houthi rebels, for instance, were quick to condemn what they called the resumption of aggression and promised to escalate their own actions in support of the Palestinians.
Saying the Palestinians won't be alone and Yemen will step up confrontation, that raises the specter of the conflict widening.
Definitely. And even the countries trying to mediate, Egypt and Qatar, they've voiced strong disapproval. Egypt called the strikes a flagrant violation and a dangerous escalation.
And Qatar used similar language.
Yeah, they strongly condemned the attacks and warned that these escalating policies could basically ignite the whole region and wreck stability. Coming from the mediators, that carries real weight.
It really does. What about other regional players? Iran, Saudi Arabia?
Well, Iran blamed the U.S. directly, saying Washington has direct responsibility for the continuation of genocide. Very strong words.
And Saudi Arabia.
They expressed condemnation and denunciation in the strongest terms, specifically mentioned the bombing of areas with unarmed civilians. That's quite a forceful statement.
Jordan also weighed in.
Jordan stressed the need to stop this aggression and called the bombing aggressive and barbaric. And Turkey described the attacks as a new phase in what they termed Israel's policy of genocide, saying it's unacceptable and threatens the Middle East's future.
Wow. So pretty unified condemnation across the region, it seems. A lot of concern about where this is heading. How about reactions from Western countries and other international actors? Is it the same picture there?
It's maybe a bit more varied, but still a lot of concern is being voiced. France, for example, condemned the strikes. They called for an immediate end to hostilities, saying it puts the hostages at risk and threatens civilians.
Okay. And the UK?
The UK called for the ceasefire to be fully implemented, urged a return to talks. A spokesperson called the civilian casualties appalling.
Ireland, too.
Yes, Ireland condemned the attacks, called for the ceasefire and hostage deal to be respected, and really emphasized the need for an urgent end to all hostilities for Gaza's civilians.
And others in Europe. Belgium, Italy, Spain.
Belgium denounced the strikes and the heavy human toll. They also specifically called out the blockade of aid as a serious violation of international law and pushed for the ceasefire's second phase.
Which was about aid.
Exactly. Italy expressed great concern that the strikes risk everything: hostage release, a permanent ceasefire, humanitarian aid. And Spain's foreign minister sounded quite distraught, saying he can't find the words, and condemned the indiscriminate bombing of civilians.
So a lot of European voices urging de-escalation, expressing serious concern. What about the United States? Our sources mentioned both official lines and, interestingly, a Reddit discussion.
Yeah, that's an interesting mix. Officially, reports suggest the U.S. still supports Israel's next steps, and they're rejecting claims of indiscriminate attacks by Israel.
But the Reddit discussion showed something different.
Well, it showed a much wider range of opinions, at least among those commenters. You saw criticism of how the Biden administration has handled things, speculation about how President Harris might act differently. Some thought she'd be similar, others tougher on Israel, some even saying this wouldn't have happened under her.
So a real mix of views in that online space.
Right. It's obviously not official policy, but it gives you a glimpse of the diverse public opinions and anxieties about the U.S. role here.
Got it. And Australia also weighed in?
Yes, calling for respect for the ceasefire and hostage deal, acknowledging the enormous suffering in Gaza, and reaffirming commitment to peace.
Okay. Now, what about international organizations, advocacy groups? What are they saying?
We're hearing strong reactions there, too. Co-author of the Council on American Islamic Relations condemned Netanyahu's government for resuming what they called horrific and genocidal attacks.
And they also accused him of prioritizing attacks over a prisoner exchange.
Yes, saying he prefers to massacre Palestinian children in refugee camps over ending the war through an exchange. Very strong condemnation.
And save the children.
They called the ceasefire collapse a death sentence for Gaza's children. Just devastating language. And they also highlighted denying aid during Ramadan as a grave violation against children.
Really focusing on the impact on kids.
Absolutely. And we should also briefly mention the UN's OCH UP the Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Their website is constantly updated, showing just how dire the humanitarian crisis is, the ongoing urgent needs.
So all of these immediate reactions really paint a picture of a world deeply concerned, deeply divided, with very strong condemnation coming from many places. But, to really understand the significance, we need to look at the bigger picture, too, the context, the potential long-term fallout. Some of our sources dug into that.
Exactly. The Cairo Review of Global Affairs, for instance, offers a really interesting historical lens. It suggests Hamas isn't the creator of the conflict, but more a product of it.
That's a crucial framing, isn't it? Adds a layer of nuance.
It does. And the same article raises a really worrying point about potential radicalization spreading across the Arab and Muslim world because of the conflict driven by the high civilian death toll and the feeling that powers like the U.S. are complicit.
Which could have major ripple effects for regional stability down the line.
Definitely. And tied to that, the Cairo Review notes potential shifts in political alignments. Like Saudi Arabia apparently pumped the brakes on normalizing ties with Israel. Now, they're saying recognition of a Palestinian state has to come first. That wasn't explicitly the case before this escalation, apparently.
That's a potentially huge shift in regional diplomacy.
It really could be. The article also talks about a possible demystification of Israeli power for smaller states, maybe making them rethink security alliances. And it touches on how Israel's own internal political divisions are playing into these regional dynamics.
Okay, so that's the geopolitical angle. What about the legal side, the judicature article?
Yes. That piece really highlights just how incredibly complex it is to apply international humanitarian law, IHL, in situations like this, especially principles like distinction.
Distinguishing between combatants and civilians.
Right, and proportionality, making sure the military gain outweighs the civilian harm. Doing that in dense urban warfare is just fraught with difficulty.
It mentions the challenge of telling civilian objects from military ones in cities.
Exactly, and it points out that the proportionality test is inherently subjective. There are real concerns about how well it applies to modern air wars and this idea of cumulative civilian harms, the damage adding up over time.
And the big underlying problem
is the lack of a strong enforcement mechanism for IHL, which raises huge questions about accountability. The article also touches on self-defense rights, limited by necessity and proportionality, and the duty of all actors, state or not, to protect civilians.
Another crucial angle comes from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. They focus on just how hard it is to get accurate information out of the conflict zone.
Yeah, they talk about the restricted access for journalists, the tragic deaths of local reporters, and just the massive amount of misinformation swirling around. It makes reliable reporting incredibly challenging.
They mention OSINT open source intelligence becoming more important.
For verification.
Yeah.
But they also warn about its limits. You still need traditional reporting alongside it.
And the misinformation problem seems to be getting worse.
Apparently so. They mention old videos being recycled, AI-generated images popping up that look real, plus the rise of sort of self-proclaimed OSINT experts online who might actually be spreading bad information, even unintentionally. It just muddies the waters further.
It makes it so hard for anyone trying to follow along accurately.
It really does.
And finally, perhaps the most powerful perspective comes from B'Tselem's Voices from Gaza. These personal stories, they really bring the human cost into sharp focus.
They absolutely do. It's one thing to talk about casualty figures, quite another to hear these individual accounts.
Just devastating stories like Qadar Abu Dia, whose home, newly renovated, full of memories, just gone. Rasim Nabhan finding a baby alive among the dead in a bombed school.
Amer Sultan losing his entire family just before his wedding, his dreams just shattered.
Haya Hasuna Asusi seeing her children killed beside their father. Shad Salem losing her husband and children, their bodies dismembered. It's almost unbearable to read.
Bilal Arakab talking about the struggle just to survive the cold in a tent, no blankets. Adnan Kasas waking up to find his baby daughter, Aisha, had frozen to death.
And Ibrahim Hasuna lost everyone, everything. All he has left are their wedding rings. These stories, they just underscore the sheer scale of human suffering.
They really do. They add that vital, deeply human dimension to all the political and legal talk. It grounds everything in the reality of individual lives being destroyed.
So wrapping up this deep dive, I think the main takeaway is Well, our sources show a world that's really fractured in its response to this latest Gaza escalation. We've seen those starkly different stories from Hamas and Israel.
Hmm.
And then significant worry and outright condemnation coming from so many other countries and organizations around the globe.
And it's crucial to remember this is just a snapshot, isn't it?
Yeah.
The situation is incredibly fluid, complex, changing all the time. What we've tried to do is just pull out some of those key viewpoints and the underlying issues shaping things right now.
Yeah. And it leaves us with some really heavy questions to chew on, doesn't it? I mean, when you see how hard it is to apply international law here, and you factor in all the misinformation, and then you hear those devastating personal stories, what are the most critical steps the international community can actually take? Steps to, genuinely push for accountability and protect civilians in these drawn-out conflicts.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or thinking about that analysis of radicalization and shifting alliances, how might this current flare-up reshape the whole political map of the Middle East in the long run? These are the kinds of big, difficult issues this deep dive really throws into relief.
Absolutely.
And really all we can do is encourage you, the listener, to keep exploring these tough issues, seek out different sources, different perspectives, and just keep engaging critically with the information as this tragedy continues to unfold.